Very good afternoon to all of you. Honorable Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharamanji, Honorable MOS Finance, Shri Pankaj Chaudhary ji, Shri Tarun Bajaj, Revenue Secretary, my respected seniors, many of whom are here today to bless this occasion, my colleagues from the board, my colleagues from the CBDT, the awardees and their families who are here also in very large numbers, dear probationers, I think, were there in the hall, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by conveying my greetings to the entire GST community and particularly the taxpayers on this 5th anniversary of GST, which we're celebrating today. As you recall, GST was widely recognized and acclaimed as the most significant tax reform ever, described variously by different experts as a tectonic shift in tax architecture. Someone else called it an unprecedented move in modern global tax history. But the scale and depth of the reform, its profundity, its magnitude and complexity is often not fully appreciated. Let us recall that this tax was something that emerged out of consensus among the center, 29 states, and the union territories, which in itself was a very daunting challenge. On the 5th anniversary of GST, it's natural to ask the question whether it's been a success, and if so, to what extent, even as we know that GST is still a work in progress. The question is, how do you benchmark its performance? Now, the way I see it, there are several ways in which you can do this. One is the perspective of taxpayers. And just a short while ago, we had 5 distinguished taxpayers who've come and shared their experience of how GST has transformed their lives as businesses ever since its inception. They've talked about the different aspects of its impact and delineated for us in detail their specific sort of impact on their lives. And overall, I think it's quite easy for us to see that the picture that emerges is quite positive. I would urge all of you to reflect for a moment whether you could have imagined a few years ago, and I think I'm qualified to say this because I've handled tax policy for long years. It was extremely difficult to imagine only a few years ago that there could ever be a one-stroke solution to complex problems of a fractured tax base, suboptimal from the point of view of revenue efficiency, multiplicity of taxes and rates, embedded taxes, cascading, and inadequate tax neutralization for exports. In fact, for most of these problems, we found what I would call second-best solutions from time to time. And now we find the GST has, in one stroke, by one sleight of hand, found a solution to almost all these problems simultaneously. The report card which the taxpayers just presented, as I said, appears to be a very balanced and positive one. Of course, there were specific issues raised, and many of them the GST Council has already addressed, and some of them are in the making. For example, one of the presenters talked about reducing the threshold for e-invoices to 5 crores. And that is a decision that's already been taken, and it's about to be implemented. IGST, there was a concern raised about IGST refunds and delays in some cases in sanctioning and remitting these refunds to taxpayers. In the 47th meeting of the GST Council, I would like to inform the House, a decision was taken to transfer the cases of blocked IGST refunds from customs authorities in whose case these refunds get sanctioned and remitted automatically to the GST authorities so that a final decision on the status of these refunds can be taken. I would also like to inform the House that we've launched a major campaign, and I would like to thank Member GST, who's here, for dealing with a large number of IGST refunds that were pending on account of the identification of somebody in the value chain as a risky exporter. A large number of these verifications were pending in different formations, and I would like to thank all the chief commissioners and the field formations for addressing this problem squarely and bringing down a very substantial reduction in the number of claims that continue to pend with us. There was a suggestion made also about star rating of taxpayers. Now, this is something that GSTN has already developed for a while, but there were some issues about data privacy, about whether it's the right thing to do, conceptually, of bringing out a star rating of taxpayers. So that is what has held it up. But it isn't as if that idea hasn't already been thought of. So what I'm giving you is a somewhat qualitative assessment, and I'm deliberately not sort of mentioning statistics, which you would have seen in the presentation that we went through this morning. What I would like to add, it's not just that it has imparted these benefits on the economy, but they're very positive externalities for the larger socioeconomic system in which we operate. And some of them that I would like to mention are digitalization. I think there was one whole presentation on that. Formalization of the economy. It shows up in the number of taxpayers that are entering the GST taxpayer base every month. Another big spin-off of the GST, as I see it, is the awareness in India about taxes that it has generated. I don't recall any time in our history where we've discussed and talked so much publicly about the impact of taxes and what they mean to us, and particularly indirect taxes. So I think that's a very big spin-off, which is going to raise awareness about compliance. It's going to raise awareness generally about what taxes mean and how the revenues from taxes are used for social good. The other implication of GST, which is very easy to see and which came through, I think, quite clearly in all the presentations that we went through, was the logistics efficiency that it has imparted on the economy. It was impossible to imagine that it would be so easy to transport goods from one part of the country to another under the CST regime that we lived under for so many years. Like someone explained, there was so much paperwork to go through. There was a rate arbitrage that was available. It was misused, quite a lot. And therefore, the state governments and state administrations were compelled to put up checkposts and to physically examine and stop the trucks while they were moving. And with the adoption of IGST, it has made it so easy for goods to move from one corner of the country to the other without any hassles. It simplified life for the taxpayer. I really admire their forbearance, patience, and adaptability to change. I think Indian industry and business have done us proud by embracing this change so openly, even though there have been complaints about minor glitches. But as I said right at the beginning, I don't know whether we stop to think about how deep and how large and expansive this reform has been. But I've never seen an ideological objection to GST. So when I talk to taxpayers, and we've seen some of their presentations today, and even otherwise in the discourse on GST, I'm unable to find any ideological sort of negativity about GST. Now let's go to the other benchmark of the international experience. And we can do this because we entered into GST a little later than others. Of course, we will have to make allowances for our differences and uniqueness. But I think, on the whole, our experience compares very favorably with our peer group. Take, for example, the dynamic that many countries like ours have struggled with between over-centralization under GST and a very licentious regime where different levels of government impose different taxes at different rates. I think we've struck a very, very good balance in doing that. I would like to cite to you the example of Brazil and Argentina, who I think are still plagued by too much sort of decentralization in their GST system, and therefore multiplicity of rates and taxes. Australia is an example which, in whose case the implementation of GST was very badly impacted by the lack of clarity about forms and procedure. I don't think we've had any major sort of setback of that nature or that scale. And the third important element of GST, which has plagued many countries, including Malaysia, has been the tardy and inefficient refunds and passing through of input tax credit in the system. And I think, as we saw for ourselves today, and we know from our experience, GST has really transformed both the passing through of input tax credits across the country, across states, across industries, as well as the refund procedure. Now, the third perspective can be from the tax administration's point of view. And I cannot help but recall, ma'am, the despondency with which the CBIC entered the GST. And there were a lot of misgivings about what GST would do to us, how it would rob us of some of our territory, would we be able to work collaboratively with the states. And I'm so happy to see today that we've been proved completely wrong. I think there's enough work on our plates, much more than we can perhaps handle. That's one. Secondly, it's opened up a big opportunity for us to find solutions to problems at the national scale. We are in a position to provide thought leadership to a lot of problems in GST. And that's visible, ma'am, from the work that TRU and the GST policy wing of CBIC have been doing, both in drafting the law, through the Fitment Committee, through the convenership of the Law Committee, both in drafting the law, in changing procedures, in liberalizing procedures, in rate rationalization, removal of exemptions, and what have you. I think it's a very big opportunity and a platform for the CBIC. The third thing that strikes me when I look at it from our perspective is that we've always had a very insular existence. And GST has given us the opportunity to work collaboratively with the states, something that I think we never imagined would happen. It's broken down administrative silos, and the relationship, in most of the cases I find, is extremely happy. We are working on joint strategy for enforcement in many cases. Even in the GST Council, the Law Committee, the Fitment Committee and all, we've worked very collaboratively with the states and continue to do so. I think there's a happy realization now, ma'am, that whether it's the center or the states that takes some good measure on the GST, it equally and impacts both the central and the state governments and their revenue collections. Now, I would like to very briefly talk about what, according to me, have been the critical success factors in the journey of GST. The first one, of course, that needs a mention is the GST Council itself. It's a very unique formation, a mechanism which thanks to Indian genius, has dealt with such difficult issues in a federal or a quasi-federal structure. The decisions, as somebody said, have always been by consensus. There's thorough discussion of each and every issue. At the same time, it's not been a slow-moving mechanism. I think the decisions that have been taken and that needed to be taken have been taken with a lot of alacrity and as quickly as possible. In fact, during the COVID period, you would recall that the GST Council has been extremely responsive to the needs of the trade, whether it was in terms of rationalizing the late fee structure, of extending timelines, or in providing a COVID package by reducing rates on products which are meant for use by COVID patients. The second critical success factor, as I see it, has been the adoption of a technology platform called the GSTN. I don't think there could have been a better way of implementing GST than to than to adopt this method of doing it. And as we've heard from many of our peers in industry and business, it has really transformed lives and the spin-off benefits that I talked about earlier. The third thing which has contributed, I think, to the success of GST has been the comprehensive outreach and hand-holding of taxpayers, as well as officers within the department that we've been doing right from its inception. And in fact, even in the run-up to it, I recall the very large number of training programs that both NACEN and state governments organized for taxpayers throughout the country. And I don't think there was any tax official who was left untouched by those initiatives. And last but not the least has been the unique model of IGST, which I think is a very big contributor, and we don't realize its significance. There's no country in the world which is of a federal nature which has adopted a similar solution to interstate or sub-federal movement of goods and services without the need for refunds when goods cross borders. I think it's a very unique Indian solution, and I think we need to applaud ourselves for it. Now, the way forward, ma'am, as I see it, and from the CBIC perspective, some of the things that we need to work on are definitely further improving compliance, whether and depending on where that taxpayer is on the compliance scale, if he needs just education and handholding, or he needs very strict enforcement. I think we should go for it, and we should go for a very concerted compliance strategy. We are wanting to do it in a less intrusive way by using AI and ML as far as possible for profiling taxpayers, for ensuring that it's not left to the discretion of individual officers to go after taxpayers, and that it's based on some basic analysis, in a centralized manner. We want to improve data quality in the returns. We want to prescribe SOPs for enforcement activity. The board is already working on that. And I think we need a more systematized grievance redressal mechanism, and particularly to deal with MSMEs. And we heard one of our representatives from the MSME sector just say that we should have more focused MSME-related outreach programs, which I assure you, ma'am, we'll work on. And the last but not the least, I think we need to work on the dispute settlement mechanism. I think the government is already thinking of a solution. So with those few words, ma'am, I would like to once again greet everyone on the 5th anniversary of the GST. And I'd like to thank each one of you, and particularly the Finance Minister and the Honorable MOS, for sparing their time, for being with us today. Thank you very much.